This empty chair represents the addict who died today, not knowing recovery was possible.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Empty Chair. We started this show 10, 12 years ago. My daughter and I started it, Colleen, and we did it for quite a few years. Then we kind of moved and did a live podcast. But now we're back here, and to celebrate our first show here, we're doing a show with people that I've had before. It was called The Ones Left Behind. And we had six people on who had lost a loved one. I have 3 of those 6 back tonight. Betsy, Gail, and Libby couldn't make it tonight. They will be missed, but the 3 I have here, I have so much respect for them. I care for them deeply, and I wish I never met them. Because if I didn't meet them, that means their kids would still be alive. But we've laughed together, especially some of us. We've cried together, all of us. And we brought them back. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Doug. And we're just going to kind of give you a little background on who their kids were. And then we'll discuss how they dealt with it, how they tried to move on, and then we'll bring it up to all these years later, and you're going to find out that, yeah, they still do miss their kids like crazy. And then in the final segment, what we're going to do is they're going to try and help everybody by telling you what they know now, if they knew then, how things might have been different, things they might have tried that would have been different. So Doug, we're going to start with you. You know, like I said, we're going to do a brief background on your beautiful daughter. Fill us in a little bit.
Well, my daughter, Courtney Griffin, passed September 29th, 2014. She was an energetic, fun kid, smart, had traveled a lot. If you asked Courtney what she wanted to be when she grew up, she always said Hawaiian. That was her answer. Yeah. She was, I don't know, life of the party kind of kid, you know. She would do anything, try anything, and she tried the wrong things. And she fought it as hard as she could. We battled it with her, with insurance companies and all the things we didn't have back then that are available now, and we lost her.
How old was she, Doug?
She was 20 years old.
When you lost her, she was 20 years old.
Yeah, 20 years old. Just a kid.
And you also have another daughter.
I have another daughter. She runs the Green Griffin Flower Shop, and she has a husband who was her boyfriend at the time. And he decided that when we lost Courtney that he was going to try and fix it. He was going to become a cop and try to fix it. And now he's the student resource officer at Oyster River.
Wonderful.
And he's been there 5 years now, and he does an amazing job. Right. Actually, I'm going to be speaking to their sociology class tomorrow morning.
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, it's, and you know, getting back to Courtney, she also had a boyfriend that didn't fare very well.
Right, he died a year later in the same room. Same room. And they struggled together, and I think that a big part of losing Courtney was the fact that we just couldn't get them apart. We couldn't get them to, you know, they clung to each other in their addiction, and it was It was a horrible thing to witness because they loved each other. They played and laughed, and we saw them struggle.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. You do have a lot of couples who, in many cases, they end up losing both of them or one of them, and they are like a trigger for each other.
Yeah, yeah. And no matter what we did, we couldn't get them to separate even for a while to get better. But they came up with recovery plans. I still on Courtney's bedroom wall was her plan to recover. She had a 30-day, 30 meetings in 30 days, and there's a whole lot of one day at a time little keychains that she got every time she went when she was sober for one day. She kept going, she kept trying, but it just didn't make it.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna, when we get back to you, and all of you, we'll talk about the aftermath. Jim, why don't you give us a little background about your daughter?
Jacqueline was actually died 2 weeks rather after Courtney. October 18, 2014. Many years ago, and she was as a lot of kids were there. She was fun-loving, and gregarious, but a little bit of an introvert, I think, and. Her goal was to become a cosmetologist. She had gone to to school and studied that, and when she dropped out of cosmetology school because of her addiction, I sort of at the time made a joke about that. All my haircuts were the most expensive haircuts I ever got, because of the tuition. But she kind of. I think joined some friends that were not necessarily that good for her, and she was going to school, and she had a good time, and she enjoyed herself, and had whatever she needed, and again, like you say, all you need to do is make one mistake sometimes, and that's what happens, when you make a mistake. She, had a few friends, I think, that probably also were using at the time. And, again, we kind of did not see a lot of it. You couldn't see it. Yeah. And it was.
Well, didn't see it, and we really didn't know a hell of a lot about it.
No. That's right. You have to read between the lines, and then kind of. Circumvent some things and intercede where necessary and talk. And the hard part was that Jackie was not willing to talk with us. Yeah. She knew everything, and the parents weren't where she wanted to go at the time. It was always with her friends.
Yeah. If I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when she died, you put the cause of death in the paper?
Absolutely, we were one of the first people, I think, that decided that it ought to be known how she died. Yeah. Okay, we were a good middle class family, and nothing to be ashamed of. And if you read the obits, as you know, Phil, it'll say died quietly, died suddenly. Yeah. Okay, family and friends were there. If you read between the lines, and that 28 years old, 23 years old, Yeah. Exactly what it is.
And how old was your daughter?
She was 25.
25.
Yeah. Her birthday, coincidentally, Phil, was yesterday.
Oh my God. Those must be tough days.
Yep. There are constant reminders all the time.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whether it's a birthday or her death date or Anne Marie sees an outfit that she said, Jackie would love this. Yeah. Or I'd see somebody on the street, remind me of her.
Sure.
Okay, there's constant reminders everywhere, all the time. Yeah. Okay?
No. And Joyce, how about a little background on your boy?
Okay, my son Jeffrey passed on November 20th, 2009. He was 30 years old at the time. He is our middle child. He was a typical middle child, kind of needy, but the most lovable on both ends. His siblings loved him, supported him, and I think at the beginning some of them might have done a little partying with him,
Sure.
but certainly never to any extent. When he started showing some signs of problems, so to speak, at the end of high school, and we try to keep a real close eye on things and whatever. He was a swimmer. He did well in swimming, but he really didn't have a good grasp of what he wanted to do with his life. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately he joined the Navy at 18. And although he was 18, he really was a young 18. Sure. And it was not, it wasn't something we were hoping they would do. We were hoping he would do some type of, his dad's an electrician, so we were hoping he'd go into a trade. He actually was working in that because he went to the Voc school. Mm-hmm. But anyways, he went into the Navy, and at first it seemed okay, and he was sent to Japan, and something happened. We really never got this story, but he told us he was being transferred to California, and actually he was going to the brig apparently, and then he got some type of discharge. But anyway, so that's when it was the beginning. Mm-hmm. When he got back home, he kind of floundered a bit, and we tried to help him get a job, which he did, and whatever. But that was another part of his problem. He had difficulty staying at one thing. Mm-hmm. And he seemed to have different groups of friends, and there were some friends that we were quite aware that weren't good for him. They were fine kids, they just weren't good together. And the problem just kind of snowballed, so to speak. And, I often say my other 4 children all graduated from college, and I always said I paid more for rehabs and whatever for Jeff than we paid for college tuition. And,
oh, yeah.
But we would do anything. And the resources, as you were saying, weren't there the same way that they are now. But I think the worst part is when he came out, there wasn't anything much in the aftermath of coming out and helping him. My husband and I and his siblings and many of our family members supported everything. But it was just always a struggle. Yeah. There were times when he was fine, and then there were times when he wasn't, and we tried to be there. And there were people that, gave us support, and there were people that tried to help us. Some people thought that we might be enabling him.
Show me the parent that didn't.
Right, I know. And that was never, but I could not put him out in the street.
I know.
I couldn't. But he did have a girlfriend, and ultimately they had a baby. And so he left us with a beautiful son who looks exactly like him.
How old is he?
He is now 22. He was only 8 when Jeff passed away. And so, he left us with many gifts, but as you said, we miss him as much
every
today
day,
as as we did in 2009.
Well, I'm going to say, and just, you folks at home, this all happened before the so-called opiate epidemic. These guys realized there was an epidemic apparently before the politicians in Boston and Washington did. So, it was, I know, I was fortunate, obviously. I didn't lose my daughter, but I do remember going through all the stuff that you guys did. I never, I was one of those that in the early days never dreamt that it was a disease. I thought it was something I could fix. And I'm sure most parents felt that way until you really learn what's going on. All right, we're going to move ahead a little bit And I know this is probably not one of your favorite subjects, but why don't you tell us how you found out when the
she
day
passed?
came?
Well, we were trying to get her into treatment. Insurance company actually told my wife that it wasn't a matter of life and death, so treatment wouldn't be covered by insurance. And one of the local officers in our town used to drive around with Courtney at night, keeping her safe. And they developed a friendship. And he was going away to some training, and he said that when he got back from the training, he would get Courtney into a place. And if we were to have her leave the home and cancel her insurance, then she would be considered homeless, and then he could easily place her in a place in Massachusetts, because he was also a fireman in Massachusetts, I guess, or an EMT something. And so we arranged to have her leave the house, and we would go visit her where she worked and have dinner with her. And it actually eased up a little bit because she wasn't in the home. We weren't facing it head on as much as we were, during the struggle. And she got in a car wreck. I think she was high. And she texted her dealer, and the dealer delivered drugs to the home where she was staying, her boyfriend's grandparents, actually. The dealer delivered the drugs to the home where she was staying, and she died in the home. Now, when they found her, it took a whole day to get the medical examiner and the police involved and a lot of other things. And since she was staying at the home of the boyfriend's grandparents, they knew about it. So they called the boyfriend's mother and told her about it. He was in jail at the time. So she called the jail because she didn't want her son to find out that his girlfriend had died from somebody else. She wanted to make sure that she broke the news to him. So when he was all upset, he asked the people in the jail if he could make a phone call, and they said yes. And I found out my daughter had passed from a guy in jail. And that was how I got the news.
I remember that.
And I said, no, Chris, she was just in a car accident last night. She's fine. And I hung up on him because I was really upset with him because he was in jail, and I felt he was the root of the problem, And he called back again crying. He goes, no, she's dead. And so I hung up and called 911. And I said, you get enough policemen to my house right now. And about 20 minutes later, cops from 3 different towns pulled in. And as soon as they got out of the car, I knew that was it. And I'll never forget my wife dropping to the floor. It was the worst.
I really don't like doing this to you guys, and I know how painful it is. But, when we do this show, unfortunately, this is a big part of the reality of substance abuse. And
it's tough stuff.
My heart breaks for you guys every time I talk to you. Jim?
As I'm sure you can understand, it's a struggle with the families. Well, my wife had scheduled this weekend away with some girlfriends to the Cape. She was away for the weekend. She went away, Friday, was going to come back on Sunday. And I was home alone. And at the time we had a dog, and I had done some work or something, so my older daughter was babysitting the dog, if you will, a dog sitting. And so I drove from Plaza to Fremont to pick up the dog and came back. And as I was driving home, my son-in-law called me and said, has anybody reached out to you about Jackie? And I said, no. And I said, what was wrong? And like Doug, I thought auto accident. First thing was, it was a car accident. And he said, no, he said, let me call you back. And then, I'm still driving, and 5 minutes later he called me back and said that he had heard that Jackie had died, had overdosed. And I said, I don't understand that. And he said, I heard through social media. that Jackie had died. So he had seen it on his telephone on social media before I even heard, and before he really heard from an official source. The police had been to our house a couple of times that day, it was a Saturday, to try and talk with one of us, and nobody was home, of course. And so when I got home, I guess the police came back again, and they came in to tell me the official word. And again, I had already heard from my son-in-law, who heard through social media, which I, really, really don't like to know, but that's just the way it is. Yeah. In this day and age, things change and things go so quickly. Okay, and so the police came in and sat and talked about it and said that this is the way it was. And she was also at her boyfriend's grandmother's house, coincidentally. I don't know how that works, but that's where she was. And her boyfriend at the time was the one who found her. He had been away, and he came back and found her in the morning. She had been planning to go to work that afternoon, and somehow, I guess, just decided that she needed to do this before.
I take it you had to notify Anne Marie?
That was the hard part, Phil. I had to call Anne Marie, and
she's away having a good time, right?
It was just devastating. Like Doug said, she just fell on the floor and screamed, and didn't know what to do. And I said, don't come home today, come home tomorrow. And I said, have somebody drive you home. And so she did. She came home the next day and had somebody drive her home. But there's never a good time for anything like this to happen. And it was just so sad that, that it happened to begin with. And then she was trying to get away from all of this, just for a weekend, just to give herself a break. And that's when it happened. And we really didn't get all the details because we live in New Hampshire, but she died in Massachusetts. Right. So she went to Boston. And when I called the ME's office, they said, they gave me a runaround and said, we'll get back to you very, very soon. Well, fast forward 10 months later before I got any results. And I was on the phone, a couple of times a month trying to get results, okay? And we didn't get any official results, as I say, until 10 or 11 months later. And they finally told her what it was. And, she did have some fentanyl in her body as well, okay?
Wow.
So
that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that's right. That was in 2014, and
that was Courtney's.
You didn't hear much about it back then. Actually,
that was the beginning, I think.
Yeah, the very beginning.
Well, that's when they were cutting it, and it was still heroin, but
heroin with the fentanyl, and as you know, that's deadly.
Yeah. And Joyce.
Well. My son at the time was living with his girlfriend and their baby. Mm-hmm. Well, he wasn't a baby; he was 8 years old.
Right.
And anyways, he was in the midst. He had started going to AA. One of my older son's very good friends ran one of the programs, and he was doing well going. And I guess on Wednesday he chose not to go. He didn't, and he and his girlfriend, who was doesn't drink, she was not involved in any of this, was very upset with him, and they had words and whatever. And so apparently, I didn't know this, they weren't talking. So they worked in the same place. He was driving, he had a pretty good job. He was doing the forklift. She's an accountant, but anyways, they usually go to lunch together. Well, on those Thursday, Wednesday, no, it must have been Thursday, of course, they drove in separate cars, and he never went to lunch. And so on Friday, she said she was going to get down and tell him, this is silly, we need to talk and whatever. And by the time she got down to the warehouse where he was already gone. And so he used to go through the office somewhere and go to the warehouse, but she never saw him. So at some point, you know, this is all the story that, of course, we got. At some point, apparently he went and met with someone, bought drugs, went back to work. And, you know, the very, very hard part that I struggle with is he died in a bathroom all by himself. So apparently he didn't go to lunch, but he went and did something. And at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she called hysterical, screaming, and just said Jeff they found him in the bathroom. He had OD'd. There was paraphernalia there, and so they knew it was a drug thing. And the place that they worked called an ambulance. I don't know how long he was out. Somebody was calling him from the warehouse. I don't know. You know, the story was rather jumbled, to say the least. But finally, after they knew he came back, somebody went to look for him and found him. Yeah. So nobody knows how long he was out. And so that was the phone call. Of course, we were told to go to Lawrence General, which we did. And I picked David up at work, and we went and we sat for maybe 2 hours till finally the doctor came out to tell us he was sorry. And that we could go in and see him. And that was something I didn't think I could do, but my husband said, "You'll always regret it." And so that's the last time I saw my son was on a steel slab and whatever. And so it's a very painful thing to talk about, but that is our story.
And, you know, and again, I apologize, you know, for asking you to go through the details, but nobody knows more than me and you guys that people have to understand that it's real and it's preventable. Okay. Doug, you know, I know all of you, after your children died, and I know a lot of people that have lost children or loved ones. Seems like they go one way or another. Too many of them just kind of bury themselves in a hole. You know, they're breathing, but in all reality, they're dead. And then we have others who want to do something positive to keep the memory of your kids alive. Now, I know all of you have done things as so many others have, but you didn't wait too long, Doug, after Courtney died.
No, actually, I had a rally on the Kingston Common, just a couple days after Jackie passed, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's when Anne-Marie.
Yeah, that's when I met Anne-Marie at there, and at that rally, I think about 200 people showed up, which is kind of unusual for Kingston, and there was, you know, TV coverage, and Pastor Aaron, who I met because of, you know, he was the pastor at the funeral, and he's a good friend of mine now. He was there. But I met a lot of people that day that came up to me to let me know that their kids were struggling, and every person that came up to me that day's kid died. Every single one of them.
Oh boy.
You know? And as you know, I own a flower shop, so I'm faced with this in a steady stream. You know, suicides and overdose. I see it way more common than you would know. Because like you say, a lot of people that die of overdose, that there isn't even an obituary, there isn't a service, you know, it's just done. You know? And I feel so bad for them because I know their pain, and I'm also the guy a year later for the anniversary flowers. and 2 years later for the anniversary flowers. And a couple months ago, I delivered flowers to a woman. It was her 5th anniversary of losing her son. And as soon as I got out of the car with the flowers, she started to cry. And I hugged her and I talked to her for a minute, and she invited me into her home. And in her living room were all of the picture boards from the funeral. And I said, you've got to get out of the house. I mean, you can't do this. You can't live this. You know, you need to stop. You need to, you know, your life is important too. And I don't know how she made out, but it was just such a sad thing to see that.
Yeah,
you know?
And I've seen quite a few that I've tried to do similar things, and yeah, they just can't move on.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy and I were involved with Mercy Street with Pastor Aaron.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, and we were, as you know, able to get many families started on the road to their personal recovery from the loss.
Yeah.
You know, and I can, you know, as we know, addiction is a family disease.
Yes.
And now they admit that it's a disease, and it is a family disease. And even if you lose a loved one, your family is still suffering from, you know,
Sure.
addiction. And I know that, you know that, but it's not talked about. You know, and I think something that we all face is, before we lost our child, we had company at our home all the time. After you lose your kids, people are like, oh crap, I don't know what to say to these people,
Exactly.
so we're not going to go there anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so we don't have company like we used to have company. You know?
And that's what made Mercy Street so special.
Yeah.
There was that togetherness. I mean, there was people like you guys who had lost someone, but there was people in recovery.
Active
There
users.
was, you know, people like myself and Fran, and you know, and it was just, I mean, with all the meetings and things I've done forever, that was the only real meeting I really enjoyed going to.
I think it was the food. I think sitting down and having something to eat.
Yeah, I knew you had to bring that up, the food. I think it was
Well,
the food.
Obviously, you've continued in that mode.
Mercy.
But you know, when you're having something to eat, you don't have to have direct eye contact with the person you're talking to. You can, you're allowed to talk and eat, and it just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
You know.
And I agree. And like I say, especially shortly after, like when you guys lost someone, it was, you got to have a support system.
Yeah.
And you got to have a positive support system, and Mercy Street was that.
I remember the first time Jimmy and his wife came in, and they had Anne Marie's. The first painting was Anne Marie, right?
Yeah, it was Jackie. Yeah.
She had Jackie's painting, and they were sitting crying in the pew, like I had been, the previous time. And a couple of months later, Jimmy and I were helping the ones that were coming in, with the new painting that Anne Marie had done of their kids,
Right.
Yeah. And
it was, it was, and I do remember Jimmy when he first started there, and it was an incredible transformation, especially for your wife, Anne Marie. Why don't you fill everybody in on how she learned to deal with it in a very unique and wonderful way?
Rather than burying our heads in the sand, I think, as you say, from day one, we mentioned in the obit that Jackie died from heroin overdose. Well, when we went to Mercy Street, we brought, after, it was a while after Jackie died, Anne-Marie decided that, maybe I should paint a picture of Jackie. And so she immersed herself in that, and it took a couple of months, and it was helping with her grieving process. And she said, this is really good. And she said, I want to share this. So when we went to Mercy Street, we brought the portrait of Jackie. Well, then Pam and Doug said, maybe could you do Courtney? And Courtney was the second one she did, and we did Courtney and brought it there. And then a couple of other people said, I like that idea. It's helping with the grieving process, and it helps the families as well as it helps with Anne Marie, doing other children. Then we got a little bit of press, and we got a lot of requests for that. After, you remember that? Yeah. It was actually it was a snowy eve in 2016 during the presidential primaries, and NPR was there, and And Tamara Keith interviewed a lot of people. She came in out of the cold, and she talked with all of us, and she interviewed Anne Marie, and was, pretty intrigued by what she was doing. And so she put that on the NPR network, and it went national, and we got 35 requests within 2 weeks, which shows you the need for this. And it's something that the parents, I think, really, really like and treasure, because it's a bright, colorful portrait.
Well, that's what I was going to say. When you think of someone doing a portrait, it's not a portrait. It's really special the way she did put all the colors into it.
Yeah, they're posterized, and she puts a lot of bright colors in there, and they're smiling faces, and that's how families want to remember their child, rather than than some sort of a negative image that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it helps the families. You'd be surprised the number of people who receive their portrait.
Oh, I know many who have had it done.
We keep the originals as, for display purposes, and then we give them a foam board copy for their personal use. Right. Okay. And what we now have is, we've become a nonprofit. And it's called Angels of Addictions.
Exactly, yeah.
And Anne Marie has to date painted well over 300 portraits from people from around the country. And
well, actually, my stepdaughter had her do one for a friend of hers who loves it.
Yeah, and people cherish it. Sometimes a mother will call, and after she gets the portrait, and she'll talk with Anne Marie for an hour on the phone, okay? Because it's a friendly call for that person who just lost their child. Because a lot of people don't understand what we're going through. They just don't know what the pain is and what the grief is. Yeah. And they kind of, like Doug says, they don't want to visit you. They don't want to come over because they don't know what to say. Yeah. And so if you talk with someone, if someone who receives a portrait calls and talks with Anne Marie, they know it's a friendly phone call that Anne Marie will understand. Yeah. And she does. It's.
Well, I remember when your obituary was in the paper, and it's a practice I've done now since then. Anytime I see someone who puts the cause of death in the paper, I reach out to them. And I want them to know how courageous I think they are and so forth like that. And I've made some really, unfortunately, good friends out of those. So, both of you guys, like I say, I've known you for a long time, and I know the things that you've done to help others to also help yourself. Joyce, now I know you and your family, you used to do a tournament.
Yes, my two youngest children were very big into basketball. They both played in college.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
All of my kids played sports, but those two in particular. But anyways, all of the kids joined in, and they sponsored a basketball tournament. And through that, we gave some scholarships for people to go to rehabs and homes, and as a matter of fact, what's the name of the one?
Oh, I'm going to give her a plug, Haven of Hope.
Haven of Hope, yes. And we've sponsored a few people. Yes. We haven't done it recently. My daughter's has two young children and whatever, but it is something that we certainly continue to think about. Yeah. I, as a mother, when this first happened, Jeff died on the 20th. We buried him the day before Thanksgiving that year, and there was Thanksgiving, then there was Christmas. His birthday is December 27th, then the New Year. That was probably the most difficult time of our lives. Not mine, my whole family. It was horrible. But what I did for me, and I don't think that there's really anything you can suggest to somebody. We all grieve so differently. But I got up, we buried Jeffrey on, as I said, Wednesday, Thanksgiving, and I gave myself a week. And although I was already retired from teaching, I was doing consulting. So I went back to work that Monday because I knew if I didn't get up and go that Monday, I probably never was going to get up. I mean, I think these are choices we have to make.
Yeah.
But I also know that I have a village. I have a wonderful, supportive husband who we grieve together very differently, believe me. And I have some very close friends, and that I could call and cry and whatever. And so we also went to support groups. I went to many of them, different ones. Sometimes I felt they helped. Sometimes the stories were so grueling that I felt worse sometimes when I came out. But it's all a learning process.
It
and
is.
I think we all have to figure out that, I never call it moving on. I call it my new life, my life.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and we call it before, that's how I kind of put things, before Jeffrey and after. And
And you have to deal with it the way you feel like you can deal with it.
everybody has to do it their way, I think.
You
But
know,
they need support.
yeah.
That's
And and like I say, I know all of you, have a great support system, and I know all of you remain active, but it's been, quite a few years now. And I do know that although you still grieve your lost ones, you do have your life didn't completely die. You do have some happy things that have happened over the last 10 years. I know your daughter got married.
She's pregnant.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm really happy for her. I can say this, that grief is something that I always tell everybody, I keep it in a briefcase. And it's a personal thing, And I hate to open it in public because I cry.
Yep.
I never cried before. Now when I open up that briefcase, I cry. So I try to manage it. And I try to continue on with my life. And now it's been over 9 years. And now all thoughts of Courtney are joyous, remembering all the good times. We never dive into the muck.
Yep.
That's part of the disease. And people have to understand that all the things that they did were because of the disease.
Yes.
These people aren't thieves, or they're in trouble. They're needing help, and the reason they're doing the things they're doing is because they're not getting the help that they need. And now that help is available for the addiction. But I think that we need to dive deeper into the issue and go after the mental health, because that's where it all starts, is problems with mental health.
Sure.
These people are trying to feel what they consider normal to do these drugs. And I speak to kids all the time, and they want to tell you their story. They want to tell what's going on in their life, and their lives are crap. Yeah. They're not saying how happy they are. They're saying how miserable they are. And I often hear people say that, they only, they're doing these drugs to get high. Well, after you become an addict, you're not getting high anymore. They're fighting being dope sick, and it's just.
Yeah, they used to not be sick. I know my daughter, when she was really hitting it heavy, she told me later on, when she was clean, that she used to wake up every morning and say, "That's it, I'm done." And 2 hours later.
Well, when my daughter was throwing up in the parking lot at work, I was telling her that she's got to stop this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when she was trying to stop.
Yeah.
And when she was happy-go-lucky and high in work, I thought she was better. Yeah. It was all backwards.
Yeah,
And I think that education to the people that you and I know we cannot reach, the parents of these kids. Yeah. If we could only get to the parents and educate them on the whole process, we could save lives.
Yeah. And I agree. Let's face it, we all know there's no cure for addiction. There's treatment, and it's not easy. If there is a solution, it is with prevention. And, and I'll be honest with you, I think the kids over the last few years, they've been doing pretty good in the school with the kids.
Yeah.
But it is the parents.
Yeah.
And you're right. I've been spending the last 20 years trying to knock on parents' heads, and it's a tough job.
How many events have we had where 3 people show up?
I know.
You know,
I know.
we'll have a big auditorium
Yeah.
and speakers and
Yeah.
Jimmy's paintings all over the place.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
You know,
But-
and politicians coming in.
You know, what I want to know, all right, now I know either you've moved on or you've created a life, separate lives, and however you have gone on, and I know you've had some good things happen, you know, kids and grandkids and marriages and business with your daughter and everything. I know you've had some good things, but you're going back 10 years and longer, and you didn't really know much. The education that, let me put it this way, we learn something new every day, all right? Now, if you had this knowledge 10 years ago, 12 years ago, do you think you could have done some things then that, do you think you could have made some changes?
I could have saved her life. I
What
know
do
I
you think
could
you
have.
could have done?
Well, I grew up in a culture where we had recreational drugs. You know, people smoked pot. It was just something I grew up with.
Yeah.
And when I first saw my daughter was messing around with pot, smoking some pot, it didn't alarm me. It didn't throw me over the edge, you know. But some people are easily hooked. Some people aren't, you know. And when I saw her beginning to drift, and then she started to, she mentioned terms like perk 30s. And why does a kid mention the words like perk 30s? What's that got to do with anything in our home or our lives, you know? And that's where she picked it up. She picked up these pills in school, you know. And if I had only known then that she was doing that, I could have sat down with her and talked with her, you know. And I don't even know if it's the treatment that's important as much as it is the communication with your family, you know, your family pitching in, you know, and not like doing the tough love stuff. Get out, get away from me, you know. No. That was a big thing. Tough love, you know. Kick them out of your house, you know. They're no good. They're vermin, you know, and they've got a disease that needs to be treated.
And that's so. And you're right. I mean, Fran and I have been running a support group for, oh my God, 20 years I think now. And yeah, we don't believe in tough love. We don't believe in detaching.
Yeah.
The only one of the big 3 that we try to follow up on is enabling.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't want to detach because when someone's ready to get help, you want them to reach out to you.
Yeah.
You know, because you know as well as I do, they'll change their mind in 5 minutes. So yeah, I mean, what about you, Joyce? Do you think you put your son in a lot of programs and so forth like that. Do you think knowing what you know now could have had any kind of impact back then?
Well, I like to always use the term that I did the best I could.
Sure.
I like to, not I, but my family, did the best we could with what we knew at the time. There's a lot more out there, and I think I would have fought harder to find the right program, to find the right treatment. I mean, you know, there were times, as I told you, Jeff had difficulty keeping a job, so both of us had to go to work, and we, but I made him be up, dressed, out looking, and he did those things. He didn't always succeed in getting this job, but we had to, the thing is, it was like a full-time job trying to make sure that we were doing what we could to, quote unquote, save him, because...
Well, tell me something. I know, and tell me, like, this is one of the biggest lessons I learned. When my daughter was clean for a good amount of time, because I didn't realize it was a disease, I thought that, she was clean for like a year. I'm saying she's all better.
Right.
Right? Have you guys ever gone through that part where they were clean for a long time,
Absolutely.
or even a short time, and you said,
I think we've won. I think
Yeah.
we beat this. I think we.
now your daughter was so young, you probably never really,
Well, she knew she had such a problem, she had to beat it. So she decided to go in the Marine Corps. So she worked for 6 months in the gym to get in enough physical shape to pass the physical to get in the Marines, and she was accepted. And she went to boot camp at Paris Island with all those big guys. And my daughter was just a little sprout.
Yeah, I
She
know.
was, just a little thing. And they found THC in her entrance urine test. So they kicked her out of the service after being at boot camp for a month. And they took her right out of the company and put her in the flunky corps. They kept her there till they could process her paperwork out, and then they kicked her out. And she was so respectful and so happy to be there, and she had finally gotten away, and she was on her way.
but what about you? Did you think like she was on her
We
way?
did. We thought it was it, because
Now back then, I'm going to say none of you thought of it as a disease.
That's the big issue. Is people never called it a disease. Okay, I mean, if you had, a thyroid problem, or you had cancer, or a bad knee, or something, people would be right by your side and talking with you and say, get that taken care of, kind of thing. But when you talk about, addiction, you get shunned.
well, there's the stigma.
It's a stigma,
And
it's
we
still
had
here
it
today.
too. We had the stigma
Yes.
ourselves.
Sure,
We
sure.
didn't reach out to people for help.
No, you didn't.
We didn't want anybody to know. Like when she died, I announced it at the church that she had died, and people were like, "What?"
Yeah.
Nobody had any idea that Courtney was a heroin addict.
Yeah. Well, that's why why we put it in the paper.
Yeah.
So that people would know. But we had an intervention with Jackie,
Yeah.
and it might have backfired on us, because there might have been a dozen people there, family, friends, people who were concerned, people who cared. And she just kind of withdrew into the chair. Said, "What's going on here? I don't have a problem. There's nothing wrong. I'm okay. I can handle this. Leave me alone." So that might have backfired. In retrospect, I might have had more one-on-one with her to try and talk with her. And I think the support groups that have sprung up recently should have been around years ago. Because you get a different perspective when you go to a support group, because you get people who are in active use, people who have been clean for 6 months, people who are clean for a year, people who are just off the street, parents like us, okay, who are concerned. You get a different perspective.
Well, I think, peer pressure works both ways, good and bad.
Right.
Now they have this. This
Sure it
is
does.
a magazine for those in recovery. It's in the state of Maine, and it's
really?
coming to New Hampshire, and it lists all kinds of places for recovery, stories. I mean, it's an excellent. If parents could read this, they get a grasp of what's going on. What they can do to help out their kids.
All right, I'm going to do something very unprofessional. Michelle, how much time we got left? Okay. I would like each of you to look into the camera and just for a minute, just tell people, pay attention, to look for the early warning signs.
Yeah.
You're talking to a whole family.
I think the best thing you can do is to sit down one-on-one with your kid and talk with them frankly about them and their friends. It has a lot to do with the friends group. And if you see your kids hanging around with two different groups of friends, and you recognize one group of friends as their good friends that you would trust, and other friends that you wouldn't know, you got to delve into that a little bit. It's important. I mean, you're fighting for their life.
Jim?
You've got to follow, like Doug said, you got to follow their friends and see who they're hanging around with, and check their behavior. Make sure the behavior remains the same. If they're an excellent student in school and all of a sudden the grades drop off, there may be a reason why. You've got to sit and talk with people. That's what I would push forward. You've got to talk with them one-on-one and say, level with me. What's going on? You feel okay? You feel comfortable? What? Are there any issues with any family members or with any of your friends? Just talk to me. Just make them feel comfortable, and talk, and you can learn a lot.
Joyce?
Well, I agree with what they're saying, but it's not always easy to talk to teenagers. That's the problem. Or even young adults, or basically people that have or into addiction. My son would tell me that, you know, he wasn't stoned, he wasn't high. I mean, he could barely stand up, and I mean, you know, and he definitely had an issue with being truthful about things.
Sure.
So, but we did try to talk, but I think that you just can't give up on it. You have to keep on and just hope that you can somehow reach them or find somebody that can help to reach them.
I would also say,
Go ahead.
the second you raise your voice, the door is going to slam in your
Yes,
face.
absolutely.
You know, so
Good
that's
point.
the worst thing you can do is raise your voice.
Confrontation does not work.
Not at all.
All right, you know, all of you out there, these guys, you know, they're my friends. I suffer with them and I pray for them. What they're saying about talking to your kids, great. Before you try to talk to your kids, make sure you educate yourself on what you're talking about. Now, I got to give my group a pitch. The Merrimack Valley Prevention and Substance Abuse Project. Our leader is Cole Welch, who couldn't be here tonight. MVP ASAP. Listen, reach out to us. We will, if you have an organization, a neighborhood group, any kind of group, church group, schools, whatever you want, reach out to us. We will go down there. We will talk with you. We will bring you the education. We will kind of show you what all the early warning signs are. Educate yourself. There's ways you can help to prevent your child and yourself from suffering this kind of fate. These guys educated themselves after in order to help others. So please, 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 don't belong to the Not My Kid group. We all did. It doesn't work. So on behalf of MVP ASAP, and with the thanks of letting us come back in here to do another show, and especially with my three good friends here, the holidays are coming up. I hope you'll send your prayers their way, because 3 years, 10 years, 20 years, when you lose a child, you don't lose it up here. So again, thanks guys. I knew you'd come through for me, you always do. And I guess we'll probably be seeing you again on the empty chair. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you.